it starts to make sense, and I was getting a better picture of what might have happened. Now, interestingly, there's new evidence that's coming out, and well, there's a few things. One of them is that most of the writings of Qumran, most of the Dead Sea Scrolls, are not allowed to be released to the public. Only, I believe, 100 scrolls have been released to the public, and the rest is not has not been released to the public at all. I find that interesting. I wonder why. But certainly, the fact is that there is evidence that Joseph and Mary, the parents of the one that was actually called Emmanuel in the Bible, the name of Jesus came later on, but in the Bible it's very specifically said to be Emmanuel, were Essene and were from the Essene community. So imagine this child coming into the field of this extremely powerful object and growing into the field of it. Imagine having an object that is like a transducer for the power of space-time, all the information of the universe in that point. When you're close to it, there's a lot of information transduction that's going through your DNA. That could make you be able to do things that the average human beings cannot do. It's like a little torque on your space-time reality. All right? And certainly walking on water is evidence of gravitational effects.
At a recent press conference, famous videographer James Cameron and filmmaker Simcha Jakobovicki presented a controversial documentary called The Last Tomb of Jesus. Their research reports on an ancient family tomb found under a construction site and documented by archaeologists in 1980. The controversy comes from the cluster of names that was discovered engraved on some of the ossuaries. One of the most prominent inscriptions reads, Joshua, son of Joseph, or Jesus, son of Joseph. Another bears the inscription Maria, or the modern Maria, and yet another read Marianne Mara in Greek, which may correspond to Mary Magdalena, as Marianne is the name found in the Acts of Philip to describe her. Though the names found on some of the ossuaries are common, it is significant to find all of these names with biblical references clustered in the same family tomb. More significant for our purposes is that it seems that many ossuaries of the first century Judea Christians bared a very specific geometric configuration. For example, the ossuary marked Marianne Mara bears very defined geometric decorations that in the context of our research have extreme significance. Indeed, once again we find the very structure of the cube octahedron or vector equilibrium engraved on an ancient artifact. It is even carved in such a way that the lobes or petal structures of the matrix are apparent in 3D. The same typical geometry is found on other ossuaries, one of which is marked Judah, son of Joshua. Certainly the claim that Mary Magdalena and Joshua may have had a child is controversial, but the symbols that are found on these ossuaries and others from the 1st century A.D. have striking significance. It is as well significant to note that both the one called Joshua or Emmanuel and Mary Magdalena were in some traditions considered to be a representation of the living ark. These symbols, as well as we have seen earlier, are found in many different traditions, and specifically in the Egyptian Osirian temple. This temple is associated with the resurrection of Osiris, with the help of his consort Isis, and may denote the structure of space-time and some of the most powerful and profound knowledge of the time. Significantly above the entrance of the tomb was a unique facade, a carefully crafted chevron and circle that mystified the archaeologists. In the words of Dr. Shimon Gibson, one of the archaeologists present at the opening of the tomb, there's no doubt about it that those symbols meant something. It's unlikely that the family or the person that came and carved out the tomb just carved these things at random. They had to symbolize something. What they symbolized, I don't know, but it's quite rare to find that kind of ornamentation on a simple tomb. Interestingly, thousands of years prior, at the beginning of the Pyramid Age, a mysterious conical stone, deemed to have cosmic origins, is found in ancient Egyptian traditions. The Bin stone was housed in the Temple of the Phoenix and was associated with regeneration, rebirth, and celestial cycles, and was thought to be the divine seed. The Bin stone disappeared long before Herodotus, an earlier Greek historian, visited Egypt, but not before it had relegated its name to the apex stone placed on top of pyramids or obelisks. One such example was found from the Pyramid of Amenemhet III and is housed at the Cairo Museum. It bears the inscription, "King Amenemhet III sees the beauty of the sun. He sees the Lord of the horizon sailing in his boat over the sky." Would this be the Lord of the event horizon flying in his ship in the sky? Interestingly, this most sacred object is almost a perfect match to the so-called chevron found at the entrance of what may be one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of our time. The chevron and circle is typical of the symbology of the ancient Egyptian all-seeing eye. Again, we see that this most important symbol in the Egyptian tradition was used to describe a fractional series from half to the magic fractional structure 1/64. The symbol is as well found as representation of ultimate power on the top altar of Mayan temples, and is depicted on walls in various ancient locations of the Americas.
I continued to study some more, and I realized that tetragrammaton in Kabbalistic tradition is typically denoted or described as this triangle structure with in this case, the letters of God in it. And if you actually look at the way the letters of God are laid out in it, it's like an isotropic vector metric. Okay? So 1, 2, 3, and 4. There's 4 layers to the isotropic vector metric. If you took the first layer here, you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4 on the bottom, 3 in the middle, 2 here, and then 1 on top. Just like the way these letters are laid. And the Kabbalistic tradition are very clear that you shouldn't take the letters at face value, that actually each letter has a mathematical number attached to it, and that it's the numbers that have a meaning as well. So if you look at the numbers of the tetragrammaton, then it's 10, 5, 10, 6, 5, 10, and 5, 6, 5, 10, and they all add up to 72. And sure enough, in the Bible and various texts, you find that the number of God is 72, or the number of faces of God, or the great name of God is 72. So it all works. It's really nice. The thing is that this is only a male God. It's missing its better half. Remember? It's missing its polarity. And so, imagine that you wanted to leave a code on a planet that's not so evolved, but you wanted to leave the code so that it would give them great power at an important time in history. But you wanted to make sure that it could not be decoded until they were ready for it. How would you do it? When maybe one way you would do it would be to give the code in a polarity way, so that you would have to have a civilization come to the realization of the equalities of polarity before they could decode the code. So, and that would most likely be a society that's ready for that type of power. So, when you take the male tetragrammaton and you add the female one, or the positive and the negative one, then you have to add a second isotropic vector metric. So the result is that you would have to double this number. 72 twice is 144. 144 is in the book of Revelation as a very important number for the new and the changes of the new world. When you put 64 tetrahedrons together and you get this fractal vectorial array, you get exactly 144 faces on its outside surface. And so that was getting compelling. But the Kabbalistics didn't stop there. The Kabbalistic traditions said, well, actually, if you want to truly understand the power of the Tetragrammaton, the power of God, if you want to understand the root of creation, you must decode this tree, which was thought to be the tree of knowledge, which is analogous to the tree at the center of the Garden of Eden. This was thought to be the foundation of creation, and that if anyone could decode this, they would hold the key to creation. There's a lot of writing in Kabbalistic tradition that says as well that it shouldn't be attempted to be decoded because most people that have gone crazy. And so I took those warnings seriously, and I thought, well, I'm most likely already crazy. Well, I live in a van, you know. I'm studying all this crazy stuff. I must be okay, you know. It won't hurt me that much. So I went at it. And I studied and I studied and I studied and I tried to figure it out. And I couldn't really figure it out. I was really bugging on it because it was getting so complex. So many texts I was reading about this were so complex and so philosophical, and they had all these realms and dimensions and all this. I couldn't figure it out. And then I decided to draw it, and I plastered it on the ceiling of my van so that when I would wake up in the morning, I could just stare at it and try to figure it out. And so I'm in the van in the morning, and I look at it, and then, you know, fairly rapidly I realize that there's a tetrahedron on the bottom of it. Okay? This part here is a tetrahedron, if it's seen in 3D. And then I looked up here, and I realized that in 3D, those lines would generate as well a noctahedron. See, the thing is that most people don't see this thing as a 3D object. So flatten it makes not much sense. But in 3D, it describes very specific geometry. So because I had this type of 3D mind, and I was always very intended on not doing the flat thing, I was trying to visualize this in 3D. But I couldn't figure out this middle box thing. I just couldn't figure it out. For weeks, months. Just like, you know, laying in my bed looking at this thing and studying and all this. And then one day, I said, wait a minute. I realized that one of those boxes in the middle here, okay, matches the box in the top portion of the octahedron. So I thought, what if I slid the middle part box in the upper box and see what it generates? So I split them in two, and then I slid the bottom part into the top part. And when I did so, it was like a key, right? It just locked in and generated all the vectors necessary to have a tetrahedron and an octahedron, one on top of each other. So now I had all these vertices for 3D geometry. These are the only geometry necessary to produce a 64 tetrahedron grid. So I knew I was close. So I got really excited, and I continued studying and intensely studying, and I realized something is that the Kabbalistic text doesn't say there's one tree at the root of foundation, the foundation of the universe, or at the root of the universe. There is 4 trees at the root of the universe. And they said that the 4 trees were attached at the same root. Now I thought, well, wait a minute. Maybe they're still giving us only half the code. Maybe there's 8 trees, and they're only giving us the polarity, the half polarity of the code. I looked at my structure again that I had come up with from sliding the bottom into the top, and I realized I had extra lines. And these extra lines match the lines to generate the star tetrahedron. So if I got all the branches of the tree, and then I attach the 8 trees together, I would have 8 star tetrahedrons coming together to generate the 64 tetrahedron grid. And what Ptolemy had decoded this right was that by the time I was finished, I could now plaster the Kabbalistic tree right over top of the 64 tetrahedron grid and get all the 9s of the 2D tree out of the 3D geometry. It worked. And hooked all together, it generated all the intersection necessary to build a 64 tetrahedron grid. And when I calculated this, then I saw that it could be done in many different ways. But one thing that was for sure, the Kabbalistic text said actually there's 10 spheres. They're called sephiroths, and they come from the word sapphire. Okay? So actually it's talking about crystals again. And it says that these sephiroths are the joints between the pathways of creation. And it said that there was this 10 sephiroth to one tree, but because they're all hooked to the same center, to the same root, which is called the crown sephiroth, which is described as a point of indwelling where God falls or God goes towards infinity. Okay? Basically describing a singularity. When they say that, they say that one doesn't count. So you get 9 sephiroth per tree. Well, if you have 8 trees and you've got 9 sephiroth per trees, 8 by 9 is 72. And now you're right back to the 72 powers of God. And the code has brought you all the way back loop of coding information. And so I continue to find the solution to this we did a small animation on how the trees come together, and it's literally the trees compressing together, creating that collapse into singularity, generating the code. It's quite amazing. Then it generates all the joints necessary to produce the 64 tetrahedron grid. So I wrote a little thing on this. It's an old book I wrote. It was all my findings on ancient civilization. I didn't write anything on. I wrote some physics in there, but just layman physics because I wasn't prepared yet for that. And the day I was writing this part of this little booklet that some people here have, that day, while writing this, I decided to log on to the net and look at what, is happening in the crop circle world. And sure enough, that crop circle occurred that day. That was freaky. So it really, was an amazing journey through this information of the Bible and the codes of ancient civilization all around. And I really was taken by it. And it was so confirming, and it just took, and every step of the way, it just kept on confirming. And, in this short presentation, yeah, I don't have time to go through all the details. I do give week-long presentations where, we have time to go through all the details of things. And even then, in a week, I usually still run out of time. But there's so many of this amazing confirmation that came along the path. Every step, every time I would doubt, something else would come out and grab me and show me the way. And and it brought me to a very different view of not only our past, but our possibility in the future, and how we move from here to the next level, how this change that so many of us are feeling on the planet is going to occur, and how we can help it, and how we can help ourselves through it. To this day, I'm finding stuff. I mean, it's amazing. There's so much stuff out there that relates to this. It's almost like there's nothing else. And in case of this being correct, then there isn't really anything else. There is this amazing structure of the vacuum that generates reality as we see it, that generates our existence, and it basically oozes out of us throughout our civilization, throughout our understanding, throughout our physics, throughout our advanced thinking, and it really brings us to a different way of relating the world. In this way of relating into the world, and that's where I believe that the New Testament and the Old Testament comes together. Because I believe that the Old Testament is talking about very advanced technology, and that the New Testament is talking about where you have to be in being able to have this level of technology. And that when the two come together, then you have a complete being, you have a complete master, you have a civilization that has reached levels of masteries in which they have an equilibrium between their external world and their internal world. They have understood that they hold singularity, that they are in contact with the universe within their physical existence, which is made from subatomic mini black holes connecting all things together. And from that perspective, a civilization would build a completely new sets of technology, a completely new set of interaction in its civilization, of relationship with each other, and certainly realize their common goal and their common aspiration. I always say this, this model tells us really that the surface of a planet is like an event horizon from which each individual is a little sun ray, right? And that sun ray has a very specific vector direction in space in which it gathers a very specific set of information. However, all of our feet are pointing to the same singularity, to the same center, and connecting us all. And that singularity holds us on the surface of this planet as our gravitational field. And if we get to this, I believe we can develop technology out of this that will bring us to the stars. And I think, that's my understanding at this point, that this is the crucial time to be able to transcend our way of doing things to the way that we need to be able to do things in order to survive the changes that are coming into our solar system and move to the next level of interaction, and maybe even connect with other civilizations that have been in our galaxy, that have been observing us, that have been waiting for us to graduate and enter a larger community, a larger galactic community, and move on from here. So thank you very much for all your attention today. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Alright, this is talking about the possible origin of the Hebrew alphabet as a sacred script used by adepts. And it's talking about how the light is shown through the pyramid capstone and they get the shapes. So then I'm trying to